Good evening. Tonight I'm going to talk to you about the threads of logic and emotion that run through a good text and how you can use these to guide the reader, to make them think what you want them to think, to make sure that they don't get bored, and to make sure that they don't get confused. Now, the text I'd like to use to explain the threads of logic and emotion is this text. This dates from 1997, from Apple Computer's Think Different advertising campaign. It was written by Rob Siltanen, who was working for an advertising agency at the time, and it was the beginning of the resurrection of the Apple Computer brand. So to start with, I'll read the text to you, and then I'll take a look at how it develops in detail from beginning to end. Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules, and they have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them. About the only thing you can't do is ignore them, because they change things. They push the human race forward. And while some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius, because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. Now, I've picked a short and simple text here so that I can explain this in the course of the session. I'll also upload a longer text entitled The Shipbreakers to StudIP. Now, The Shipbreakers is an article from National Geographic, and you will be able to find the answers to that exercise quite easily. So I won't be assessing it, I'll just be uploading it as an exercise for you, along with a separate document containing the solutions. I recommend that you do that after you've listened to my discussion of this text. So, this text begins with the short sentence, "Here's to the crazy ones." What does this mean? It's a little mysterious. In English, the phrase "here's to" is normally a toast. So you raise your glass and you wish someone well, or you congratulate them. So the text begins with "here's to the crazy ones," without defining what the crazy ones are. It then goes on, and three more very short sentences: the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers. Now, these short sentences can only refer back to the undefined crazy ones in the first sentence, because there's only one noun that's mentioned in the first sentence, the crazy ones. And the text in this way names three negative groups of people who could all be considered crazy ones: misfits, rebels, troublemakers. The rhythm of the text then changes a little, and this is a bit like the way that a song might develop. It then says, "the round pegs in the square holes." Now, round pegs in square holes is an English saying. It's the idea that if you're looking at perhaps a child's toy that consists of different shapes that you can match and put into a matching hole, then if you try to put a round peg into the square hole, it doesn't fit in a satisfactory way. They don't mate. It isn't neat. So, in the first few sentences, they've named these three very negative groups: misfits, rebels, troublemakers. And now, in a longer sentence, the round pegs in the square holes, the author is describing a characteristic of these people and lumping them all together really, saying misfits, rebels, troublemakers, they all have this characteristic, that they're round pegs in square holes. But then another longer sentence, this time including a verb, and this is the first in 5 sentences that actually includes a verb. So you could say it's the first sentence in 5 that's actually complete. The ones who see things differently. So this is then talking about the attitudes of these groups of people. And it's interesting that this is now neutral. Earlier it was talking about negative groups of people. Now it's saying seeing things differently. This is sounding more neutral, more ambiguous. It then develops and it says they're not fond of rules and they have no respect for the status quo. It's interesting to see how this negative, not, is then repeated in the next sentence as no. This is strengthening a point by repeating the similar words. And you can see that between the 2 sentences, the word and is not used to join 2 sentences, but to begin a new sentence. Sometimes in English this is acceptable, and it's acceptable when you want your reader to pause before continuing. It makes the connection, but the full stop encourages the reader to pause. The next sentence is interesting because the pronoun changes. Earlier, the text said they're not fond of rules. Now the text develops with you can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them. You in this case is serving as a synonym for the English word one. Now, one represents an example person, but you is more informal, which is why it's used here. It's not necessarily talking about the reader here. The next sentence, about the only thing you can't do is ignore them. So it's giving the reader a choice. In the first sentence here, you can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them. These are choices, options that the reader has. But then the next sentence, the only thing you can't do is ignore them. And then the reason, because they change things. They push the human race forward. And you can see now, the tone of the text has changed to being something that's very positive, because the phrase, they push the human race forward, is talking about positive changes in the world. And this word because is the first connector which gives a reason for anything in the text. A lot of people, they'll write a text and they'll fill it with words like therefore and hereby and thus and things like that. And they often use it as a way to try to make up for a badly structured text. And it's interesting to see that this because about halfway to 2/3 of the way through the text is the first one of these words which in a clear-cut way gives a reason. Because they change things. And then the they is repeated, which then strengthens the connection between one sentence and the previous sentence. They push the human race forward. And while some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius. You can see the pronoun has changed again here. They're no longer talking about the example person, the you, but now they're saying what we, that is, Apple Computer as a company, thinks and sees. We see genius. Now, this sentence here is a little bit sly. It's very, very clever because they've managed to put we see genius into this very short phrase without actually saying we are geniuses. So we are geniuses would be seen as boastful, but we see genius and the proximity of the 2 words to each other means that the reader is quite likely to think that without it being stated explicitly. Then in the next sentence, the word because is repeated again to give another reason. Because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. And at that point, it's then become highly positive, because if you talk about changing the world without talking about whether it's positive or negative, people will always interpret that as being a positive thing. And in a way, it's a bit of a surprise. It's a bit of a twist in the last sentence. You've let the reader develop their opinions during the text. The author has then encouraged the reader to think more positively about people who are different, about people who are often seen by most of society as being crazy. And at the end, they spring this little surprise on the reader and say, the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. So here you've got a text that in quite a subtle way leads the reader from believing that people are different, are crazy, to giving them the choice to see this in a different way, and in the end saying, well, if you see it in this way, you can see the good they bring to the world. You can see that they are the ones who come up with the new ideas. They are the ones who change things. And it's important to note here that there's a clear progression. So moving from negative to neutral to positive, the changes in pronouns, moving from the they to the you to the we, and there are no asides in this short text. There are no oh, by the ways. Now, in a scientific text, you usually begin with an opening sentence that's shorter and, well, not necessarily shorter, but clearer and less mysterious. And this is a deliberately mysterious first sentence for an advert, and you probably go for something less mysterious in a scientific paper, but it could nevertheless be a question or a statement of a problem, something that encourages the reader to think a little harder, encourages them to want to know a little bit more and to read on further. So I hope that's given you some ideas about how you can build these threads of logic and emotion into a text. Both are important in text. The logic, the sort of B follows A and so on, and also the emotion, what kind of feelings that you then generate in the reader's mind. And what I'd like you to do for your assignment this week is very simple. I'd like you to go out, look in magazines, look on the internet, and I'd like you to find an example of an advertisement, preferably one that has a reasonable amount of text on it, several sentences of text at a minimum, and I'd like you to pick one that you find particularly effective and convincing, an advert that really encourages you to buy the product that's being advertised. And then I'd like you to upload that to the folder Instant IP in a format that everyone will be able to read, so preferably something like PDF or JPEG by the 22nd of June. What I'll show you here is a few of my favorite advertisements. This one here is one of my favorite advertisements of all time. In the year 2000, there was the Millennium Dome, which was built to celebrate the new millennium, and it had a very large diamond in it. And there was a robbery where a gang of men broke into the Millennium Dome using a JCB excavator like this one, and attempted to steal the diamond, but got caught and arrested in their speedboat, and the diamond was recovered. And a few weeks later, the manufacturer of the excavator, JCB, came out with this advertisement that said, "Dome diamond robbery, the only thing that worked to plan." A very neat way to capitalize on the circumstances here. Another one which capitalizes on people's boyhood dreams here, this advertisement here from Porsche, which says, "Honestly now, Did you spend your youth dreaming about someday owning a Nissan or a Mitsubishi? And the last one here from the English car manufacturer Jaguar. They've created this little BMW logo in the middle out of yogurt and blueberries. And at the bottom, if you can read that, it says, "Devour the road." Now, this is a bit like what happens in the text from Apple, in that it says the car will devour the road. The suggestion is, though, implied very clearly that the Jaguar will devour the competition. So it will devour the BMW. And there were others, I think, for an Audi and perhaps for a Renault and other cars at the time. The reason I'm getting you to think about advertisements here is because the way that emotions are manipulated in advertisements and the importance of writing something that's short and to the point are much, much clearer and easier to understand than if you're working on a scientific paper or something like that. Now, in a scientific paper, it's important that you are honest and that you maintain your integrity, but you should still be attempting to lead the reader's thoughts in the right direction to make the paper easy to understand. When you refer to the work that's been done up until now, when you refer to the most important points of your own research, when you structure things logically so that they move from A to B to C without cutting back and forth, and when you pick the right pronouns so that it's clear who's done what and what the significance and importance of the individual scientists' work and actions were. So I would recommend that you also take a look at this exercise that I'll upload to StudIP called Text Reconstruction. This refers to the article The Shipbreakers. The original article is also available in StudIP, and you can read that and see the answers to the exercise once you've done it. So I won't be taking this in. It is optional, but I strongly recommend that you do it. And my key tips would be, look for the repetition in the text, look for the words and phrases that are repeated, because they provide very strong associations in a text, even if those associations are subconscious. And also look at the series of events, so the order, the sequence in which things take place, because that's very important when you put the text back together from these individual blocks that are given in the exercise. So that's all for today. Your assignment is due on the 22nd of June. That's for you simply to find an advertisement that you find convincing, that tempts you to buy the product, and upload that in the folder to StudIP so that everyone can see it for later in the course. So it should be a simple and easy assignment for this week. That's all for today. Thank you.